Yeah, talent changes. So last night they announced some talent changes for DK specifically. First we have the blood stuff, and it's pretty much just damage all across the board, and I think it's mainly aimed at Mythic Plus / AoE tanking and raids for like Broodkeeper. So we got a bunch of different damage buffs. It's also like a single target buff, obviously, because you use all of these abilities also in a single target, so that's nice. They didn't buff Shattering Bone by quite as much, but they refrained from buffing Shattering Bone, which is like your top damage in M+ specifically, by too much. I think this is overall a good buff. It will probably not mean that Blood Decay is suddenly like the best tank damage-wise, but it will definitely close the gap between Blood Decay and Prot Warrior specifically. One thing that Prot Warrior still has in comparison is Spell Reflect, because Spell Reflect scales with key level and can do massive amounts of damage in Mythic Plus specifically. And I would like to see a fix for that it just is capped at some level, if it's Mythic 0 or Mythic 10 or something. I don't think the damage you do with Spell Reflect should scale up with the keys that you're doing. I think that is a bit too much. It can get very out of control. All in all, this is a pretty good buff for Blood Decay. Also, it helps with threat quite a bit when you don't have Tombstone ready. With Tombstone, usually you put down the D&D and you press Tombstone with your Blood Shield charges, and you get a lot of snap AoE threat, so that is usually very good on bosses like the tree boss in Algefar Academy, where you really need that threat. But all of these AoE buffs definitely help with threat outside of that cooldown. Good changes for Blood all around. I don't really think Blood needs any defensive buffs. I think Blood is in a very good state when it comes to the playstyle. It just gets overshadowed a little bit by other tanks in certain regards of the game. But I think for what Blood Decay is supposed to be, I think it is very well designed right now. It is very fun in M+. You have a lot of control, and you're quite tanky. There is some abilities, like always, that Blood struggles with, but that's fine. For Frost, we have a bunch of damage buffs straight up and some quality of life changes. One of them is Unleashed Frenzy Duration, is now 10 seconds. It's very similar to the Plaguebringer buff that they did a couple weeks ago for Unholy. It's now 10 seconds, which is really nice. This buff is easier to keep up, especially for the Obliteration builds. It gives you more freedom to do your rotation, especially during the Obliteration windows, where you, with procs, usually want to weave in the obliterates with the rhyme procs. And if you got a lot of good rhyme procs, you lost this buff. So this will give you a bit more leeway to keep that up. Should be a DPS buff for the obliteration spec as well. But it's mainly a quality of life thing, so the rotation feels a bit nicer to play. Next up, we have the Cleaving Strikes. This is in the class tree. In Obliterate hits 2 additional targets. When D&D is down, your Obliterate will hit 3 targets total, which is quite strong. And that is definitely a buff to all Frost specs, but especially for the Obliteration spec, and especially for the two-hand version of the Obliteration spec, this is very nice. Yeah, overall a good change, and I think this is for raiding a very cool change. This also benefits the Breath spec. The Breath spec doesn't really do anything for Unleashed Frenzy, because every tick of Breath procs Unleashed Frenzy, so this only does something for the Breath spec outside of the Breath window, which currently don't exist, because Breath is balanced around permanent Breath, pretty much. Cleaving Strikes, though, is really nice for all DPS specs for Frost and will improve the cleave, which is something that Frost was not too strong on. Then we have Frost Fever, just 50% damage increase, which is very strong. Glacial Advance is this talent right here, and it got buffed as well, which is our version of an AoE runic power spender, which is not Breath. It got changed with Dragonflight. It has no cooldown now, so now this got a 20% damage increase. It's an option for the M+ spec, and I can definitely see some M+ spec with Obliteration with no Breath popping up that use Glacial Advance. This makes it quite a potent damage increase. Frost Strike also got buffed though, so this is more like for the single target Obliteration builds. I think this should get buffed more. I don't think Obliterate itself needs to be buffed, but Frost Strike only getting a 10% buff is kinda meh. Then we have a big one, Frost Whelp's 8 damage increase. That is the damage from sending the whelp. It was very underwhelming in the Dragonflight version. This talent is a rework of the Azerite trait from BFA, where in BFA it was very strong. The damage component of it was very strong, whereas the Dragonflight version is not that strong. So it got buffed by 100% now. So that will definitely make it very appealing. It is already quite appealing for the Mastery buff itself, but the damage buff will make it better. And then finally we have the Frost Scythe damage, and this is mainly for M+. M+, or like a spec that you would play maybe on Broodkeeper if you're sent to AoE. It got buffed by 35%, which is quite massive, but the problem with Frost Scythe still exists. It has to compete with Cleaving Strikes, Obliterates, which hit 3 target now, and Frost Scythe is a ability that deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. So there is a very narrow target count that really fits Frost Scythe damage profile in theory, which is like 5 targets basically, and constant AoE. Another problem with Frost Scythe is that it doesn't benefit from Frost Reaper. That makes it quite a bit worse than Obliterate on like 2-3 targets. It has to compete with Cleaving Strike, which now also got buffed. Remains to be seen if there is some kind of BFA style M+ build that has Frost Scythe, that takes Frostwhelp's 8 and that uses Glacial Advance as well, and it just perma does AoE damage. In BFA, the spec was very good because it could do AoE and good single target at the same time. You were basically playing the single target Frost spec just with Frost Scythe, and then you were using different Azurites. So now you have to spec away from quite a bit of single target to get some of these AoE. So I don't know if this is enough to make Frost Decay without Breath good in M+. I think Frost Decay with Breath in M+ is very annoying to play, and I don't even think it's that good. But for raiding, these buffs have like maybe unintended side effects that make the Breath spec even more overpowered compared to everything else the spec can offer. I'm not too happy with these changes. I would rather see a little bit of rework in the talent tree. Previously, I mentioned that Breath is just so strong right now and so potent. It's all about the perma Breath and keeping it up for minutes at a time without dropping it. Breath should be a choice in the middle of the tree early on, so probably here. That's how I would do it. And then you put Breath there as a choice node with something else. You should choose between the Breath playstyle and the non-Breath playstyle. And then it should be a conscious choice in the middle of the tree that you're basically forced to take that choice. And then the rest of the tree can then specialize in more single target and more AoE. The spec itself needs to work around this. And then in addition to that, I think Breath of Sindragosa should not be based around perma Breath. I really think Breath of Sindragosa, for me personally, was the most fun in, for example, the Ashara fight back in BFA, where it's about 30 to 45 second breaths, about the big burst and the big cleave potential and single target as well. So it's like a 2-minute cooldown, but right now it feels like you toggle it at the start of the fight, and if you lose it, you trolled. You just messed up. You just lost all of your damage. It doesn't feel like a 2-minute cooldown. Very bad to mess up, while at the same time it feels good if it goes well and you don't lose it. But most of that it goes well feeling comes from a lot of RNG and having good procs. So there's a lot of skill involved to get long breaths, but I think having the mental strain of having to keep breath up for the whole fight is not what breath should be about. I would rather have breath be capped at 40 seconds. One suggestion for breath personally is to make it ramp up in runic power cost after 20 seconds. So let's say it costs like 1 runic power more every second after 20 seconds, but then also buff the damage. So it does more damage in the 2-minute window cooldown, but it is impossible basically to keep it up more than like 40 seconds or something. So that's like my idea of breath. Would make it very similar to what Surrender to Madness was for Shadow Priest, obviously minus the dying part. We don't want to die at the end of our breath. I mean, that are the changes for Frost. Something that is like completely missing here is something about Chill Streak. Chill Streak is like kind of in a weird spot here. It's very hard to fit it into your talent builds. Kind of need to spend 2 points for it to be good with Enduring Chill most of the time. I'm hoping at 10.07 we can see some additional changes for Frost, mainly in the talent tree, that will make the spec a little bit nicer and make it not so dependent on perma breath, because that's like the big problem, I think. That the whole spec is just overshadowed by perma breath. 2 small side effects from this: Blood Plague damage increase by 15%, and we have Frost Fever damage increase by 15%. Unholy with Superstrain just takes the values that Frost and Blood get in their spec for those spells and multiplies them by 0.8. So this is an indirect buff to Unholy AoE, a little bit. So we sneaked one in, boys. We got one. We got a buff. It does nothing for the single target spec, because the single target spec looks like this. It doesn't play Superstrain. There's a couple changes for Unholy on the 10.07 PTR build right now. More changes to come, as they've written here, that are mainly addressing quality of life and underperforming talents. One of the big changes is that Epidemic and Unholy Blight are changed now. So this is the updated build from the PTR. Unholy Blight used to be here and the Epidemic used to be there. And this is changed now. And what this does is, like, you might think, oh, this doesn't really do anything. But what this allows you to do is craft a build that is focused on single targets that has Epidemic. So it's mainly going to Even Fever, picking up Plague Bringer, and then picking all the mandatory talents here. I think it's like this, or you can go the Death Call route as well. I think you have 2 choices there, like this. So you can get Commander of the Dead, Gargoyle, and Unholy Assault So you get your free, this is like the single target setup down here. And to get that, you had to only spend 3 points here. So this did not allow you to take basically Epidemic and Commander of the Dead and Unholy Assault at the same time. This was not possible. But now it is possible because Epidemic is here. This means that we can maybe sacrifice a little bit of single target, but this build might still come out ahead against the Death Coil route with Plaguebringer and Eben Fever. And we have Epidemic now as a spender in this build. So this is really handy for situations like Razagath, where we need single target but intermittent AoE with like many targets. So that is like a build that is good for that. I think it's okay, but I would rather love if Epidemic is completely baseline. I mean, it's definitely an improvement. The M+ build doesn't really change. What does suffer though is, I think, the PvP build. The PvP build definitely suffers because it was taking Unholy Blight. That is now missing, and now you have Epidemic, which doesn't really do anything in Arena. That's going to be a bit annoying for PvP. Alright, next up we have a change that we don't really know exactly how it works yet. I'm not sure. I have not been on the PTR yet. But the Pestilence implementation has been updated to better reflect the functionality of the tooltip. So currently the tooltip says Deathknight damage has a 10% chance to apply a festering wound to the enemy. Now currently, before this change, one Deathknight cast has a cap of 10 total wounds it can apply. And also, in addition to that, it has an ICD, which means it can only apply 1 wound every second. If I read this and would have to predict it, it just means that it probably does exactly what it says. So every instance of damage from Death and Decay probably has a 10% chance to apply a wound, which is quite interesting for M+ and for the wound build specifically, because this has usually been a talent which has not been so sought after, especially also in single target. It's not that good. If this is doing it, it will do a lot for like big target pools with many chances of applying wounds. It's even good for the Eben Fever Superstrain build without Bursting Source. But yeah, it's obviously really good for the Bursting Source build, which is currently not that good, but that might make it a bit better. Next up, we have Rotten Touch. The duration is increased to 10 seconds. So that's just a straight up damage buff. If you go Rotten Touch, you want to play Clawing Shadows. I think you want to combine them kind of. Then also we have Runic Mastery, now increases Runic Corruption regeneration rate by an additional 10 to 20%. So Runic Corruption is a passive that when you spend Runic Power, you have a chance to gain Runic Corruption. And Runic Corruption speeds up your rune speed by 100%. I'm not quite sure how the math will work there. It is generally not something we currently need. Like runes and runic power, we have so much of that as Unholy that I don't really see a point to spend the 2 points here, because basically Runic Mastery just has to compete with improved Festering Strike, which is just straight up damage. Yeah, it's a nice thing for Runic Mastery to have that, but I think it's still gonna lose out to improved Festering Strike. We have another big change. Commander of the Dead has been updated to always buff your nearby Gargoyle or Dark Arbiter and Army of the Dead ghouls for 30 seconds after using Dark Transformation. So they're talking about how there was edge cases where it was not consistently buffing, and now they're making it an aura around the player. You just need to make sure that your pets are around you, and then they will get buffed. And what this also does is, previously, whenever you pressed Dark Transformation, you had like a short window of like, I think about 4 seconds, where any ghoul from Army of the Dead and Apocalypse and the Gargoyle that you spawned in that time was gonna get buffed, no matter if you did it after the Dark Transformation or before. Now they're changing it so that it's just an aura around you. So when you press Dark Transformation for 30 seconds after, any pet, any ghoul that you will spawn will be buffed. So what this changes is, in the opener, currently we have to use Apocalypse pretty soon after we press Dark Transformation to make sure that the ghouls that are spawned from Apocalypse are being buffed by Commander of the Dead. It means we can line up the duration of your Summon Gargoyle together with your Festamite window even tighter. Summon Gargoyle has a duration of 25 seconds and Festamite is 20 seconds. Like a lot of your buffs as well are 20 seconds, like Unholy Assault, Empower Rune Weapon, Power Infusion, those are all 20-second buffs. So now what we can do is we can use your Gargoyle and then 5 seconds after start all of those 20-second buffs. So that means we can do a couple of Death Coils extra to juice up the Gargoyle before, because currently the way it is, you have Gargoyle and it's fully buffed up, and then your 20-second buffs with Festamite and the haste buffs and your Argify Academy Trinket, they all run out, but your Gargoyle is still there because of how the durations work. So that will make that timing a bit tighter, and you can play it better and make sure that you get the big crits of the Gargoyle at the end of its duration. So that's pretty cool. This is also, I think, an indirect buff for Gargoyle, which is kind of problematic because Gargle is already like one of the strongest single target bursts in the game, especially with power infusion. I wouldn't be surprised if Blizzard will maybe do something about that, but I would love some compensation in other areas of the spec for more sustained single target. Yeah, apparently this has a 25-yard range in the new change, so you need to be around your pets, similar as you have to be on the targets for Unholy Aura, so this might be a bit more annoying to play than it currently is. Your pet is always trying to stay behind the target, or in Sinam specifically, there's like specific spots where it is in the air. So it can totally be that your pet is like 50 yards away from you. And then that would make Commander of the Dead not too appealing in those situations. Maybe you can outplay it with like pet move commands. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, it's definitely a big problem actually now that I think about it. If this is just 25-yard range, that is definitely a big problem on these big bosses and they need to address that. This should be at least 50 yards, I think. In the end, they give us a note. The additional changes for Unholy Deathknights coming in future 1007 PTR builds that aim to address the quality of life concerns and underperforming talents. So I'm not quite sure what they mean by underperforming talents because they already buffed a lot of underperforming talents. I think Feasting Strikes, that should definitely get like a buff. Maybe Oval Surf and probably also Pestilent Pustules. Like maybe Harbinger of Doom could use some change. One thing that I want them to do, now that they talk about the quality of life concerns, like they need to do something about the pets. The pets are a very annoying thing about Unholy. So whenever you summon your pet with Raise Dead, your pet, you cannot move it. It doesn't do anything for like 4.5 seconds or something. They have to finish the spawning animation to come out of the ground. Yeah, it's very annoying. Where it is very annoying indeed is like if you Dragon Ride and you fly around, your pet disappears. It's like stored. And then when you land, normally with normal flying mounts, it appears again when you land. But currently with dragon riding mounts, it doesn't do that. You need to actually dismount your dragon riding mounts and then it does the auto spawn thing. And then again, it's stunned for 4 seconds pretty much. You cannot do anything with the pet. It's very annoying in one dungeon specifically, Noku Defensive. When you fly from pack to pack, especially in this area with your dragon riding mount, your pet just needs to spawn out of the floor every single time for 4.5 seconds. It is so annoying. Whereas when I'm on my Warlock, I summon my pet, it charges into the mob and starts blasting literally instantly. All of the pets, they have like so cool quality of life things. For Demonology, they have like a rotational spell that charges your pets on a 10-second cooldown. Yeah, sure, we have the leap, but it's a 30-second cooldown. And definitely change the spawning animation of the pets. I think just removing it completely would be a very nice change if I can just summon my pet and send it in instantly. And then one big thing, this is not Unholy specific, but please, Blizzard, please, just put Death Grip off the GCD. Everybody hated that change. Remove Death Grip off the GCD. It is so annoying. Whenever I log on my DK in Wrath of the Lich King Classic and I can press Death Grip off the GCD, I love pressing this button. But on retail, where I have to weave it into my globals and then you have this weird like half global after Death Grip, it just feels extremely clunky. I really don't like it being on the GCD. So please take it off the GCD. Thank you. And then also one other thing that they should do for Blood, maybe put Gorefiend in the class tree so DPS DKs can enjoy this super cool spell as well that we also used to have in the past, but they took it away and put it on Blood only. If you don't want to do it, make it more accessible for Blood specifically, because down here there's so many really good throughput talents. Basically this is all throughput and people are just not speccing Gorefiends unless they really need to, like on Razageth Progress, and then they're sacrificing like damage from Shattering Bone or something. Something needs to be done about Gorefiend's Grass, and my preferred solution would be to put it in the class tree, because that would make every DK viable for fights where there is a need for Mass Grip. And you could say, oh yeah, we want a DK in the raid because when we need Mass Grip, we have a DK. It doesn't matter what he plays. Also just give DK a raid buff, like 3% crit or something. Could be good.